The grand chamber of Primaxis 7 stretched out like a vast cathedral of metal and light, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to reach into infinity itself. Representatives from 47 different star systems stood in their designated areas, each species displaying their own unique form of patience or restlessness as they waited for the session to begin. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime, converting thousands of different languages and communication methods into something resembling universal understanding. At the center of it all sat the High Council, 7 beings from the oldest and most powerful civilizations in known space, each one representing centuries of accumulated authority and unchallenged dominance. Commander Vexler of the Krillian Empire stepped forward into the speaking circle, his 4 arms carrying data tablets and holographic projectors with practiced ease. His exoskeleton gleamed under the chamber lights, polished to perfection for this momentous presentation. For 20 planetary cycles, his intelligence division had been observing the newest species to achieve faster-than-light capability, and now he would deliver his final assessment to those who ruled the galaxy. The chamber fell silent as his image was projected to every corner of the massive room, ensuring that even the smallest delegation could see his confident posture and hear his words with crystal clarity. "Esteemed council members and honored delegates," Vexler began, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustic systems, "I present to you the complete analysis of species classification 773. Native designation, humanity." With a gesture of his upper right appendage, holographic displays erupted throughout the chamber, showing a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in one of the galaxy's outer spiral arms. They call their world Earth, and by all measurable standards, they represent perhaps the most primitive species to ever achieve interstellar flight in recorded history. The displays shifted to show human cities, crowded and chaotic, built upward in defiance of logic when land stretched unused in so many directions. Vexler highlighted their transportation systems, crude wheeled vehicles that burned processed hydrocarbons for propulsion, creating pollution that choked their own atmosphere. Their space vessels were little better, using chemical rockets that required enormous fuel expenditures for minimal payload capacity. Their faster-than-light technology, Vexler continued with barely concealed contempt, is rudimentary at best, allowing them to achieve speeds that would take months to cross. Distances our courier ships traverse in days. The holographic displays began showing something that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their positions. Human warfare. Vexler showed battles from throughout their recorded history, conflicts that consumed entire generations and left landscapes scarred for centuries. He showed their weapons, starting with sharpened stones and wooden spears, progressing through gunpowder and explosives, culminating in nuclear devices that had nearly sterilized their own planet during something they called the Cold War. "They are violent beyond measure," Vexler declared, pointing to statistics that scrolled across multiple screens. "In the past 3,000 planetary rotations, they have known perhaps 50 cycles of complete global peace. They war over resources, over ideologies, over invisible lines they draw on maps, over which version of their numerous gods holds ultimate truth." Several council members made gestures of disgust or disbelief, their various forms of body language all conveying the same message. How could such a species reach the stars? Vexler anticipated this question and brought up another series of displays, these ones showing human innovation. "They possess," he admitted with grudging acknowledgement, "a certain crude adaptability. When faced with obstacles, they do not seek harmony or patience. They attack problems with brute force and rapid iteration, creating thousands of failed solutions before stumbling upon one that functions adequately." The displays showed human technological progression, advancement that had occurred at a pace that some species found alarming, though Vexler was quick to contextualize it within galactic standards. "Despite their rapid advancement by their own primitive standards," he continued, "they remain centuries behind even our newest coalition members. Their energy generation relies primarily on fusion reactors, barely stable and requiring constant maintenance. Their weapons are kinetic and explosive in nature, dependent on physical projectiles rather than directed energy. Their understanding of quantum mechanics is theoretical at best, and their artificial intelligence remains bound by ethical limitations that prevent true computational transcendence. Vexthor paused, letting this information settle over the assembly. Like a heavy blanket of assured superiority, the Krillian commander activated his final set of projections, these ones showing detailed tactical analysis and battle simulations. Should humanity refuse to accept coalition authority and technological oversight, military subjugation will be swift and absolute. I have run 4,000 combat simulations using every possible variable and advantage we could grant to human forces. The holographic display showed human ships, laughably small and ungainly, facing off against the sleek and powerful vessels of the Coalition Honor Guard. In every simulation, the human forces were swept aside like dust before a storm, their hulls torn open by energy weapons they had no defense against, their slow vessels unable to escape or maneuver against superior propulsion systems. Conservative estimates, Vexthor announced with absolute certainty, place complete human capitulation at 4 to 6 planetary rotations after initial engagement. Optimistic estimates suggest they may surrender after witnessing our capabilities, without requiring extensive destruction of their infrastructure and population centers. He deactivated the projections and turned to face the High Council directly, his posture radiating complete confidence in his assessment. I recommend we extend them the standard ultimatum: submit to coalition oversight and accept our guidance towards civilized development, or face the consequences of their prideful defiance. The High Council conferred among themselves, their private communication channels buzzing with encrypted exchanges that the General Assembly could not access. After what seemed like an eternity but measured only 17 standard time units, the Chief Counselor rose from her seated position, her crystalline form refracting the chamber lights into rainbow patterns across the walls. "The analysis is accepted," she declared in a voice that resonated with harmonic frequencies. "Commander Vexthor, you will personally lead the Honor Guard to this Earth and deliver our ultimatum. 3 rotations for their response, as is traditional. Should they refuse, you are authorized to use whatever force is necessary to bring them into compliance with galactic law." Vexthor bowed deeply. All 4 arms crossed over his chest in the Krillian gesture of solemn acceptance. "It shall be done, honored counselor. I will depart within the current cycle." He gathered his data tablets and projectors, already planning the composition of his fleet in his tactical mind. 300 ships should be more than sufficient, he calculated, enough to demonstrate overwhelming power without appearing paranoid or wasteful of coalition resources. The Honor Guard had broken rebellions twice this size with half the numbers. As Vexthor left the Grand Chamber, he passed delegations from dozens of species who had once stood where humanity now stood, who had faced the same choice and made the wise decision to bow rather than break. None of them met his eyes directly, each one remembering their own moment of submission, their own acceptance that the Coalition's way was the only way forward for primitive species who needed guidance. The Krillian commander felt no sympathy for the choice humanity would soon face. Only a professional satisfaction that another potential threat to galactic order would soon be contained, controlled and civilized according to proper standards. His flagship, the Eternal Dominion, waited in orbital dock above Primaxis 7, a vessel 5 times the size of humanity's largest space station, bristling with weapons that could glass planets and shields that had never been penetrated in 3 centuries of service. Around it, the Honor Guard assembled, 300 ships of various classes, each one crewed by professionals who had trained their entire lives for moments exactly like this. They would jump to this Earth system, deliver the ultimatum, and await the inevitable surrender or the brief but decisive combat that would follow refusal. Vexthor settled into his command chair, surrounded by holographic displays showing his fleet in perfect formation, and gave the order to begin the journey to humanity's home system. The jump drives activated with a familiar thrumming sound that vibrated through the hull, and in a flash of distorted light, the honor guard vanished from Primaxis 7, beginning their journey to what Vexler assumed would be just another routine subjugation of another primitive species who had reached beyond their grasp. The galaxy had room for humanity, certainly, but only in their proper place, beneath the guidance and control of those who knew better, who had maintained order for centuries. Who would continue to maintain that order for centuries more? The commander had no way of knowing that he was leading his fleet not to a routine victory, but to the most devastating defeat in coalition history. One that would shatter centuries of assumed superiority in mere minutes. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, hidden under 3,000 feet of solid granite and protected by security systems that could detect a single unauthorized molecule, Dr. Kevin Park walked through corridors that officially did not exist. The Prometheus research facility had been carved out of the mountain over 15 years, its construction disguised as a geological survey project, while thousands of the world's brightest minds gathered in secret to accomplish what every expert had declared impossible. Kevin's footsteps echoed against polished metal walls that hummed with power, the air itself charged with energy from reactors that operated on principles the Galactic Coalition still considered theoretical fantasy. He paused at an observation window overlooking the main assembly bay, watching as the final components of humanity's 12th Dreadnought-class warship were being fitted into place by robotic arms guided by artificial intelligence that could process information faster than any biological mind in known space. The ship stretched for 3 kilometers, its hull composed of metamaterials that could redistribute kinetic energy across its entire surface and shed heat into pocket dimensions that human physicists had discovered purely by accident while researching faster-than-light communications. Kevin allowed himself a small smile as he remembered the panic that had seized the scientific community when they first detected the Coalition probe entering the solar system back in 2089, how that panic had transformed into determination, and how that determination had produced miracles. The breakthrough had not come from studying alien technology because humanity had never captured any alien technology to study. Every advancement, every impossible leap forward, had emerged from human minds pushing themselves beyond every reasonable limit. Kevin walked past laboratories where quantum computers operated at temperatures approaching absolute zero, their processing cores existing in states of superposition that allowed them to calculate millions of scenarios simultaneously. He passed testing chambers where weapons were being calibrated, not the crude kinetic guns that Vexler had observed in his surveillance, but rail cannons capable of accelerating projectiles to 98% of light speed using magnetic fields so precisely controlled they could thread a needle from 1,000 kilometers away. In another section of the facility, engineers monitored fusion reactors that generated enough power to supply entire cities, their containment fields maintained by the same gravitational manipulation technology that made human ships capable of maneuvers that would turn any biological pilot into liquid paste without proper protection. Kevin had been there the day they cracked inertial dampening, watching as a test vehicle accelerated from 0 to 0.9 light speed in 3 seconds, while a cup of coffee sitting on the console did not spill a single drop. The Coalition believed such technology required another century of development, but they had made a critical error in their assumptions. They believed advancement required stability and time, when human history had proven repeatedly that pressure and desperation produced innovation faster than comfort ever could. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison sat in the cockpit of his Valkyrie-class fighter, running through pre-flight checks for what felt like the 1,000th time, his neural interface connecting directly to the ship's systems through ports implanted at the base of his skull. The connection was seamless, instantaneous, making the fighter respond to his thoughts faster than his own body could respond to conscious commands. Around him in the massive hangar bay, 99 other pilots were doing the same, each one selected from millions of candidates for their combination of reflexes, spatial awareness, and the particular brainwave patterns that allowed smooth integration with the neural interface technology Jake's fighter was a work of art disguised as a weapon. Or perhaps a weapon disguised as art. Its sleek form optimized not for atmospheric flight but for the physics of space combat. The hull could phase shift for exactly 3.7 seconds, allowing it to pass through solid matter by temporarily existing slightly outside normal spacetime, a trick that had required sacrificing 2 test pilots before the safety protocols were perfected. The propulsion system used controlled gravity wells, essentially falling forward in whatever direction the pilot chose, achieving accelerations that made conventional rockets look like children's toys. Jake had logged over 2,000 hours in simulation and 500 in actual flight, and he still felt a thrill every time the neural link activated and the fighter became an extension of his own body. The weapon systems were equally impressive. Quantum torpedoes that did not explode in any conventional sense, but rather convinced the molecular bonds of their targets to simply stop existing, causing ships to disintegrate into clouds of component atoms without any dramatic fireworks or waste heat. Jake had watched test footage of a quantum torpedo striking an asteroid the size of a small city, and within 4 seconds, that asteroid had ceased to be a solid object, becoming instead a diffuse cloud of iron, nickel, and silicon that dispersed harmlessly into space. The coalition shields were designed to deflect energy and absorb kinetic impacts, but they had no defense against a weapon that attacked the fundamental forces holding matter together. Captain Nicole Brooks stood on the bridge of the UESS Thunderchild, her command chair positioned at the center of a spherical holographic display that showed her everything within 1,000,000 kilometers in real time. Her ship was one of 12 dreadnoughts, each one commanded by officers who had proven themselves in simulation after simulation, preparing for an enemy they had never fought but studied obsessively. Nicole had memorized coalition tactics, their formations, their standard engagement protocols, and she had identified 17 critical weaknesses in their doctrine that made perfect sense for a military force that had not faced serious opposition in 3 centuries. The Thunderchild's main armament consisted of rail cannons positioned along its spine, each one capable of firing projectiles massing several tons at relativistic velocities. At those speeds, the kinetic energy of each round exceeded the yield of primitive nuclear weapons, and the Thunderchild could fire 12 rounds every 7 seconds. The ship also carried quantum torpedoes, point defense lasers for intercepting incoming fire, and experimental pulse weapons that created temporary disruptions in spacetime, causing anything caught in their field to experience thousands of years of entropy in milliseconds. Nicole had watched metal turn to rust and then to powder in combat drills, and she knew that coalition armor, however advanced by their standards, would fare no better. Beyond Jupiter's orbit, the 12 dreadnoughts held position in absolute silence, their hulls wrapped in cloaking fields that bent light and radiation around them, rendering them invisible to any conventional sensors. The cloaking technology had been adapted from research into camouflage, combined with quantum mechanics and a healthy dose of human stubbornness when the initial models failed catastrophically. Nicole remembered the scientist who had finally made it work, a woman named Dr. Susan Chun, who had worked for 96 hours straight, sustained by coffee and spite, until she forced the equations to cooperate. Admiral Lisa Monroe broadcast from the UESS Washington, the command ship positioned at the center of the human formation, her face appearing on screens throughout every vessel in the defense fleet. She had been a fighter pilot herself once, before rising through ranks not because of politics but because she possessed the rare combination of tactical brilliance and the ability to inspire absolute confidence in those under her command. "All ships, all crews," she began, her voice calm and steady despite the weight of what was coming. "In approximately 4 hours, the Coalition Honor Guard will arrive at the edge of our solar system. They expect to find a primitive species ready to surrender or too foolish to know when they are outmatched. They will find neither." Lisa continued, her words reaching thousands of men and women who had trained in secret, who had sacrificed years of their lives to a project they could not discuss with their families, who had believed in humanity's ability to defend itself against impossible odds. What we have built here, what you represent, is not just military hardware or advanced technology. You represent humanity's refusal to kneel, our insistence that we alone will determine our place among the stars. The Coalition has maintained order through intimidation and overwhelming force, and they have grown arrogant in their certainty that no one can challenge them. Today, we teach them a lesson that will echo across the galaxy. Humanity does not submit. Humanity does not surrender, and humanity sure as hell does not go quietly into subjugation. The crews responded not with cheers or bravado, but with quiet determination. Each person checking their systems one final time, reviewing their assignments, preparing for the moment when theory would become reality. Jake Morrison felt his fighter systems respond to his thoughts, the neural interface so smooth that he could not tell where his consciousness ended and the ship's processors began. Nicole Brooks studied her tactical displays, already planning the opening NG salvo that would announce humanity's presence with devastating clarity. Kevin Park watched from the facility beneath the mountains, knowing that every calculation, every innovation, every sleepless night spent wrestling with impossible physics had led to this singular moment. The Coalition believed they knew humanity, believed their observations and analysis had given them complete understanding of Earth's capabilities. They had watched human ships, counted human weapons, assessed human technology, and concluded that victory was assured. What they had not observed, what their surveillance could not penetrate, was the greatest secret in human history, that beneath the surface of apparent primitive capability, humanity had been building an arsenal that made Coalition technology look like museum pieces. They had not reverse-engineered alien science because they had never needed to. Human creativity and desperation combining to produce innovations that the galaxy had never imagined. The countdown continued. Hours becoming minutes, and across the human fleet, readiness reports came in one after another, each ship, each fighter, each weapon system confirming operational status. Humanity had spent 15 years preparing for this confrontation, and now the moment approached when preparation would be tested against reality. The Coalition Honor Guard was coming, confident and certain, sailing toward Earth with the assumption that this would be another routine subjugation. They had no idea that they were not approaching a primitive species ready to surrender, but rather a carefully prepared ambush that would shatter their assumptions and change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The Coalition Honor Guard dropped out of faster than light. Travel at the precise coordinates that marked the edge of Earth's solar system. Their 300 ships, materializing from folded space in a formation that had intimidated countless species into immediate submission. Commander Vexler stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, watching his tactical displays light up with sensor data as his systems cataloged every planet, every moon, every significant asteroid in this unremarkable star system. His forearms moved across control surfaces with practiced efficiency, directing his fleet into the standard approach pattern that Coalition doctrine had refined over 3 centuries of unopposed military superiority. The sensors showed exactly what Vexler had expected to see. A small yellow star with 8 major planets and 1 dwarf planet, various moons and asteroid belts, and the 3rd planet from the star showing the telltale signs of industrial civilization. What the sensors did not show was any sign of defensive preparations. No orbital platforms bristling with weapons. No fleets of ships rushing to intercept his advance. Nothing but empty space and the faint electromagnetic chatter of a species that seemed blissfully unaware of the force that had just arrived at their doorstep. Vexler allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, his tactical computer already calculating that this would be one of the easier subjugations in recent memory. A CTIVAT the communication systems and began broadcasting the ultimatum on all frequencies that humanity used for their primitive radio communications. His translator converting his words into the dominant languages of Earth. The message was standard, refined through decades of use. Acknowledge Coalition authority. Submit to technological oversight, accept guidance towards civilized development, or face the consequences of continued defiance. Vexler gave them the traditional 72 hours to respond, then ordered his fleet to begin advancing toward the inner system at a measured pace designed to give the humans time to appreciate the overwhelming power arrayed against them. Hours passed in what Vexler considered tedious waiting, his fleet moving deeper into the solar system while his sensors continued scanning for any sign of response. His communications officers reported that Earth's transmissions had increased dramatically, their military channels buzzing with activity, but still no ships appeared to challenge his advance. Vexler began to wonder if perhaps humanity would choose the intelligent path of immediate surrender, saving themselves the humiliation of military defeat. He ordered his fleet to assume attack formation nonetheless, 300 ships arranging themselves in the wall pattern that had crushed 43 rebellions without ever suffering a single vessel lost to enemy action. The 72 hours expired with no formal response from Earth, and Vexler felt his irritation growing at this apparent disrespect for coalition protocols. He gave the order for his fleet to continue advancing, planning to position his ships in orbit around Earth's moon before demanding their surrender at weapons range. His tactical officers reported optimal firing solutions. His shield operators confirmed all defensive systems at full power, and his flight control teams verified that every one of his 300 ships was in perfect position. Everything proceeded exactly according to doctrine, exactly as it had dozens of times before. Then the universe changed. From behind the massive bulk of Jupiter, 12 contacts appeared on Vexler's sensors simultaneously, objects that had not been there 1 second ago, suddenly occupying space that his systems had scanned and declared empty just moments before. His tactical computer struggled to process the energy signatures it was detecting, numbers that made no sense according to any known physics, power outputs that exceeded theoretical maximums by orders of magnitude. Vexler's training took over and he barked orders for his fleet to assume defensive posture, but even as his ships began to respond, his mind was screaming that something was terribly wrong. Captain Nicole Brooks sat in her command chair aboard the USS Thunderchild, watching the coalition fleet react to humanity's appearance with gratifying slowness. "All batteries," she said calmly into her communication system. "You are authorized to fire on my mark." Her tactical display showed perfect firing solutions. 12 dreadnoughts with clear lines of sight to different sections of the coalition formation. "Mark," she said, and the Thunderchild spoke with a voice of thunder. The rail cannons fired in perfect sequence, electromagnetic fields accelerating projectiles to velocities that transformed simple metal into devastating weapons. The rounds crossed the distance in seconds, covering millions of kilometers before the coalition ships could even begin evasive maneuvers. The first projectile struck a coalition cruiser amidships, punching through shields that were designed to deflect energy weapons but had no answer for solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. The kinetic energy transfer was catastrophic, the cruiser's hull rupturing as the projectile passed completely through the ship and out the other side, leaving a tunnel of superheated destruction in its wake. 11 more projectiles found their targets in the next 3 seconds, and 11 more coalition ships suffered varying degrees of damage ranging from crippling to catastrophic. 3 of them exploded outright, their reactors breaching as containment fields failed under the sudden trauma. Vexler watched in horror as his tactical display suddenly showed 12 red markers indicating destroyed or disabled vessels, and his mind simply refused to accept what his sensors were reporting. This was not possible. No species reached this level of capability without coalition oversight. His intelligence reports had been clear about human limitations. He was still struggling to process this impossibility. When the second wave arrived, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison led his squadron through a maneuver that would have killed him instantly, if not for the inertial dampening systems that made physics optional. His fighter accelerated from 0 to 0.98 light speed in less than 4 seconds, using Jupiter's gravity well as a slingshot to add even more velocity to an already impossible speed. Around him, 99 other Valkyrie fighters did the same, their neural interfaces allowing coordinated precision that no conventional formation could match. They materialized inside the coalition formation, having crossed the distance so quickly that the alien sensors barely registered their movement. Jake's targeting systems locked onto a coalition destroyer, his thoughts translating directly into action as his fighter released a quantum torpedo. The weapon struck the destroyer's hull, and reality itself seemed to protest as molecular bonds simply ceased to exist. The destroyer did not explode in any conventional sense. Instead, it began to disintegrate from the point of impact outward, its hull plating turning to powder, its internal structure collapsing as the fundamental forces holding it together were convinced to stop functioning. Within 8 seconds, a warship that had served the coalition for 70 years was reduced to a cloud of component atoms that dispersed harmlessly into the vacuum. All around the coalition formation. The same scene repeated as 100 quantum torpedoes found their targets. Vexler's tactical display became a chaotic mess of red markers and warning klaxons, his orderly wall formation dissolving into panic as ships tried to evade enemies that moved too fast and struck with weapons that bypassed every defensive system the coalition had developed. His communications channels filled with distress calls, captains reporting impossible damage, crews abandoning ships that were coming apart around them. And through it all, Vexler could only watch as his certainty crumbled into dust. He tried to rally his fleet, ordering them to return fire, to target the human ships with their energy weapon, and show these primitives that the coalition did not fall so easily. Some of his ships managed to fire, brilliant beams of concentrated energy lancing out toward human vessels. But the dreadnought's shields absorbed the impacts with ease, adaptive energy barriers distributing the heat across their entire surface and venting it into pocket dimensions. The human fighters were even harder to target, their phase shift capability allowing them to temporarily exist outside normal space, appearing and disappearing as they wove through the coalition formation like ghosts. Admiral Lisa Monroe watched from the U.S. Washington as the battle unfolded exactly as human simulations had predicted. The coalition's rigid doctrine, making them predictable, and their 3 centuries of unopposed superiority, making them slow to adapt. She gave orders calmly, directing her battle groups to close off escape routes, positioning her ships to create a perfect sphere around the coalition fleet. Every avenue of retreat was blocked by human vessels. Every attempt to break out met with overwhelming firepower that sent would-be escapees tumbling back into the kill zone. Vexler realized with growing horror that his honor guard was not fighting a battle, but rather caught in a carefully prepared ambush. His every tactical option anticipated and countered before he could even give the orders. His ships were dying, not in glorious combat against worthy opponents, but slaughtered like livestock by a species he had dismissed as primitive. He ordered his remaining vessels to concentrate their fire, to focus on a single human ship and overwhelm its defenses through sheer volume. But the human fighters responded by targeting his heavy cruisers, eliminating the ships with enough firepower to pose any threat. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted 17 minutes from first shot to final casualty. Of the 300 ships that had composed the coalition honor guard, 283 were completely destroyed, their crews killed when their vessels disintegrated around them. 16 more were disabled, drifting in space with shattered hulls and dead propulsion systems. Only 1 ship remained operational, and that was the Eternal Dominion itself, Vexler's flagship, which the humans had deliberately spared by targeting every ship around it while leaving it untouched. Vexler sat in his command chair, surrounded by silent bridge officers who could not meet his eyes, staring at tactical displays that showed the complete annihilation of the most powerful fleet the coalition had assembled in decades. Around his ship, 12 human dreadnoughts held position, their weapons still hot, their shields still active, and 100 human fighters circled like predators waiting for any excuse to strike again. The commander's forearms hung limply at his sides, and for the first time in his long military career, he had absolutely no idea what to do next. 3 months had passed since the battle that the galaxy now referred to simply as the 17 Minutes and the Grand Chamber of Primaxis. 7 had transformed from a place of absolute authority into something resembling a debate hall where voices that had been silent for centuries suddenly found the courage to speak. The High Council sat in their elevated positions, but their posture had changed. The casual arrogance replaced by a wariness that came from having their fundamental assumptions shattered by a species they had dismissed as primitives. Around the chamber, representatives from the 47-member species engaged in conversations that would have been unthinkable just months earlier, questioning policies that had seemed immutable, wondering aloud why they had accepted technological restrictions when humanity had proven such limits were artificial constructs designed to maintain coalition dominance, rather than universal laws of development. The Valkyrie delegation huddled in their section, their insectoid forms clicking and chittering as they debated whether to formally request removal of the restrictions that had kept their propulsion technology locked at sublight speeds for 2 centuries. Nearby, the Sorthian representative composed a message to his homeworld suggesting they revisit the weapons research that had been forcibly terminated when they joined the coalition. Throughout the chamber, similar conversations repeated. Species that had been subjugated so long, they had forgotten what independence felt like, now remembering that they had made choices under duress. And those choices could be unmade if they found the courage that humanity had demonstrated. Ambassador Gregory Walsh stood in the designated human area, watching the chaos his species had created with a mixture of satisfaction and carefully maintained diplomatic neutrality. He had been selected for this role precisely because he could project both strength and reasonableness, his background as a Marine giving him credibility when he needed to remind others of human military capability, while his years of diplomatic training allowed him to navigate the complex politics of galactic governance without causing unnecessary offense. Beside him stood Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, his fighter pilot uniform immaculate and his bearing radiating the quiet confidence of someone who had proven himself in actual combat rather than just simulations. Dr. Kevin Park completed the human delegation, his presence serving as a constant reminder that human technological superiority was not an accident but the result of systematic innovation that the coalition had failed to predict. The chief counselor called the session to order with a harmonic chime that echoed through the vast chamber, and the various delegations settled into their positions with varying degrees of reluctance. She began by acknowledging what everyone already knew. The coalition had suffered its first military defeat in 3 centuries, and the implications of that defeat required honest discussion and potential restructuring of policies that had governed galactic civilization since before most current species had achieved spaceflight. Her crystalline form seemed dimmer than usual, as if the shock of recent events had affected even her at a fundamental level. The council moved through preliminary matters with unusual efficiency, everyone aware that the real discussion would center on the human question. Finally, the chief counselor addressed Ambassador Walsh directly, her harmonic voice carrying both residual authority and newfound respect. Ambassador Walsh, the High Council has deliberated extensively on the matter of Earth's status within galactic civilization. We are prepared to offer humanity associate membership in the coalition, with certain provisions regarding technology sharing and military coordination that we believe would benefit both parties. She outlined terms that would have seemed generous to any species that had come before: access to coalition trade networks, diplomatic recognition, and reduced oversight compared to standard membership requirements. Gregory Walsh listened politely until she finished, then stepped forward into the speaking circle with the easy confidence of someone who held all the advantages in a negotiation. Chief Counselor, honored council members, I appreciate the consideration that went into this offer, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. However, I must respectfully decline on behalf of Earth and her people. The chamber erupted in startled conversations, species shocked that humanity would refuse what many of them had desperately sought. Gregory waited for the noise to subside before continuing. The terms you offer would place humanity in a subordinate position, subject to coalition authority and oversight. This is precisely what we fought to avoid. Earth will accept nothing less than full sovereign status with complete equality among all galactic powers. The chamber fell into stunned silence, broken only by the Chief Counselor's response, her harmonic tones carrying an edge of something that might have been frustration. Ambassador Walsh, you must understand that no species has ever been granted such status without first proving themselves, through centuries of compliance with coalition standards. The structure you propose would fundamentally alter the balance. That has maintained galactic peace for longer than your species has had written language. Gregory smiled politely but without warmth. Chief Counselor, I would suggest that the balance you refer to was maintained through intimidation and overwhelming force. And recent events have demonstrated that this balance was more fragile than you believed? Humanity is not requesting special treatment. We are insisting on the recognition that should be granted to any sovereign power capable of defending its interests. The debate continued for hours, various council members raising objections and concerns while Gregory systematically dismantled their arguments with logic backed by the implicit threat of human military capability. Finally, after consultation among themselves, the High Council agreed to humanity's terms, granting Earth full sovereign status and equal standing in galactic affairs. The vote was not unanimous, several members abstaining or voting against, but the majority recognized that attempting to force humanity into subordinate status would likely result in a war that the coalition could no longer guarantee winning back on Earth. President Helen Clark addressed the United Nations General Assembly in a speech that was broadcast simultaneously to every inhabited continent and orbital facility. She stood at the podium overlooking the assembly hall, her expression showing both pride and awareness of the weight that came with what humanity had achieved. My fellow citizens of
Earth, she began. Her words translated into hundreds of languages for the global audience. Today marks the moment when humanity takes its place among the stars, not as subjects or subordinates, but as equals. The Galactic Coalition has formally recognized Earth's sovereignty. Acknowledging our right to determine our own path forward without external oversight or restriction, the assembly hall erupted in applause. Representatives from every nation standing to celebrate a victory that belonged to all humanity regardless of borders or politics. Helen waited for the noise to subside before continuing, "This achievement belongs to every person who contributed to our defense. From the scientists who solved impossible problems, to the soldiers who trained for an enemy they hoped never to face. From the factory workers who built our ships, to the citizens who trusted their governments during years of necessary secrecy. We faced an existential threat, and we met it not with surrender, but with determination and innovation. We've proved that humanity's greatest strength is not our weapons or technology, but our refusal to accept limitations that others try to impose upon us." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "However, we must remember that gaining recognition is only the first step. The galaxy is vast and filled with wonders and dangers we have barely begun to imagine. The coalition may have been humbled, but there are surely other powers out there, their species with their own agendas and capabilities. We must remain vigilant, continue advancing our technology and capabilities. Never assume that our current advantages will last forever. The moment we become complacent is the moment we become vulnerable." In orbit above Earth, Captain Nicole Brooks stood on the observation deck of the UES's Thunderchild, watching her home planet rotate slowly beneath her while her crew conducted standard maintenance on the systems that had performed flawlessly during the battle. Around her ship, the other 11 dreadnoughts of the first battle group held formation, and beyond them, newer vessels were being completed at orbital shipyards that had been expanded dramatically in the months since the victory. Nicole reflected on how quickly everything had changed, how humanity had gone from hiding in their own solar system to being recognized as a major galactic power, and she wondered what challenges would come next. General Patrick Hayes joined her at the observation window, his uniform showing the signs of a long day, spent coordinating the expansion of human military forces throughout the solar system. "Admiral Monroe wants to know if you're ready for the Deep Space Patrol," he said without preamble. We're sending 3 battle groups into the border regions to establish our presence and make sure everyone knows that Earth's defense perimeter extends well beyond our home system." Nicole nodded slowly. Watching clouds swirl across the Pacific Ocean below, "We proved we can defend ourselves," she said quietly. "Now we need to prove we can be trusted as partners rather than feared as conquerors." On Prime Axis 7, Commander Vexler faced a tribunal that would determine his future within the Coalition military structure. He stood before his superiors, accepting responsibility for the defeat while also presenting his analysis of what had gone wrong and why. To his surprise, the tribunal did not strip him of rank or disgrace him publicly. Instead, they assigned him to a new position, Liaison to Humanity, charged with studying human tactics and technology to help the Coalition understand their new galactic neighbors. It was a position that carried both honor and humiliation. Recognition that his experience made him uniquely qualified, while also serving as a constant reminder of his failure. As Vexler left the tribunal chamber, he encountered a group of younger Coalition officers who looked at him with something approaching sympathy. One of them, a Krillian like himself, approached cautiously. "Commander," the young officer said quietly, "many of us do not blame you for what happened. You followed doctrine perfectly. The problem was that the doctrine assumed we would always face inferior opponents. Perhaps this defeat will force us to innovate again. To remember that military superiority must be earned through constant improvement rather than assumed through past victories." Vexler considered this perspective and found wisdom in it. The Coalition had grown comfortable in their dominance, and comfort bred stagnation. Humanity had reminded them that the galaxy did not care about historical precedent or established hierarchies. Power belonged to those who could maintain it through capability rather than tradition. And the Coalition had allowed their capabilities to atrophy while assuming their position was permanent. The final scene played out aboard the UESS Washington, where Admiral Lisa Monroe hosted a small gathering of the officers and scientists who had made humanity's victory possible. They stood in the observation lounge, glasses raised in a toast, watching Earth shine in the distance, while around them, the infrastructure of humanity's growing space presence sprawled across orbital space. "To the future," Admiral Monroe said simply, and the others echoed her words before drinking. Dr. Kevin Park looked around at the assembled group. These people, who had worked in secret for so many years, sacrificing normal lives to build defenses against threats that most of humanity had not known existed. "What do you think happens next?" he asked, directing the question to no one in particular. Jake Morrison answered first, his fighter pilot perspective shaping his view. "We explore, we expand, we find out what else is out there. The galaxy just got a lot more interesting." Admiral Monroe had the final word, her voice carrying the weight of command and the hope of someone who had seen humanity rise to meet an impossible challenge. "What happens next is that we build a future where humanity stands among the stars as equals, where we forge alliances based on mutual respect rather than fear, and where we continue to prove that our greatest strength is our refusal to accept anyone else's definition of what we can achieve." The Council predicted our defeat in days, and we shattered them in minutes. That was not the end of humanity's story. That was just the beginning.